Welcome to today's episode of Do Good Work. And what we're going to be talking about today is how to set your company environment that allows your team to thrive. And to do that, we brought on someone really special. Let me tell you a little bit about who we're bringing on today. So she's actually pumped up football fans as a professional NFL cheerleader. She then has also had a 3-year TV segment on CBS, KCTV5, and has also lived in a canoe in the Florida Everglades. Fast forward till now, she speaks to employees and employers around the country in over 45 different states, teaching them about emotional intelligence, generational differences, and importance of personal development. She offers real-world practical advice, which is why we're having her on here, to help everyone live their best, most authentic self. And she told me that she's really excited to be here. So please help me give a warm welcome to millennial and workplace culture expert, Shannon McKain.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
So it's really exciting to get everything rolling with you. So what we're doing in this mini-series is we're pretty much going over from the employer standpoint where they're no longer the number one employee in their company. They're looking out to build a team. They've gone through the hiring process. They have a team in place, but now when you have that in place, that's really where the rubber actually starts to meet the road, where you're actually beginning that journey and fostering a team culture, growing a company culture to allow the employees to essentially not just want to go to work for a paycheck, but go to work for a bigger mission. So today what we want to review and what I want to bring you on is just to pick your brain around your experience working with corporate cultures and how to foster that team environment, because the environment's really important when you set that correctly.
Yeah, it really can allow for employees to succeed or to fail. And so I really find it important and valuable for companies to really spend a great deal of time on reflecting what their culture is and how they can help their employees succeed.
Yeah, because a lot of the times I think that we focus on the individual and we idealize the individual, but it's actually the team that really allows you to thrive or succeed, because even the best individuals with a bad environment still fail. So
Yeah.
when you've worked with different corporations and done all these speakings all over the country, have you worked mostly with physical office spaces as opposed to remote?
Oh, that's a great question. So my clients can be both, especially in 2019, we see a really significant shift in a company dynamic of being able to offer that remote opportunity for their employees. You know, we're always looking for what's the best talent to add to the team. And so if that means that they don't necessarily need to come into an actual physical office space or storefront space, but yet they can still contribute and be a really instrumental part of the team, then yeah, why not allow them to be remote? And so yes, when I've worked with companies and organizations, I've definitely seen it in both formats.
Okay. So when it comes to setting a team environment physically, let's talk about the physical first. I think that's a little easier, even though it's not easy. It's a little easier to address. What are some of the main components that you see are critical in order to foster a team culture?
Yeah, so the first kind of question that I will ask a company is, what is your company culture? Like, I just want to open-ended ask the question and see how they respond. And if they have to sit and think about it for a little bit, then my response immediately to them is, I don't think you have a company culture, because if you don't have something set in stone defined, and that can change. I mean, it can certainly change over time. I mean, I definitely encourage companies to throw that 40-page manual out the window from 1960. You know, like, we have to make sure that we're constantly reinventing and reevaluating that piece of the puzzle. But if you don't have some kind of a defined idea of what that culture is, then you can't create a culture for employees to thrive in.
That is really true. And I think it goes hand in hand with a company brand, because the branding is what the customer sees, but that's also what the employee sees in their onboarding, when they're actually working with their managers or coworkers or their teams. So it goes hand in hand, company culture with the branding. So pretty much companies may not know their brand exactly then if they don't know what their culture is.
Yeah, so I do think that branding is certainly a component of it. If a company's brand stands for excitement or stands for working mothers or stands for we want to be the lowest price point, whatever that brand identity is to the consumer, yeah, absolutely, that can bleed over into what the company culture is. But I do think that you have to take it a step farther and say, okay, these are our defining ideals about how we want to operate as a business, outside of just the brand identity. And then you want to build employees that fit into that culture and ideal.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's say they go through the first step. They understand that their culture, and let's say that their culture is, working hard but having fun at the same time, or something simple, right? Well, once you move past that first stage and they define what their culture is, what's the next stage to developing that environment?
Oh gosh, well, allowing employees to be successful within a corporation, there's so many different avenues and facets to that. I think one of the fundamental pieces to really developing great employees and great teams is really understanding personality differences within the workplace. I'm a strong believer that we are all born with kind of this nature versus nurture idea that naturally we were born with a certain set of skills that we bring to the table with our IQ, with our personality, with just who we are as an inherent human being. And then we also have the nurture part of who we are that can certainly strengthen some of those natural parts, but then also can foster and what's what I'm looking for, like if you grew up in the Midwest versus growing up on the East Coast, you might have some of that nurturing just a little bit differently, from a cultural or geographical standpoint. And so for me, when I'm really identifying strong teams within an organization, it's important for me to understand what are those personality dynamics, and are people understanding what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and can they communicate and work well with other people on the team? Does it all fit into the culture? Is everybody behaving in what the culture is standing for, and do we need to make some changes?
Oh, wow. That's a lot of intake. So would you say that there's, when the hiring process, there's a manager that takes intake like of their personality tests and make sure that that matches with the team dynamics and frequent feedback loops, or how do you see that actually fleshing out in real life?
Yeah, so I think a team takes all kinds to make it a world-class team. And so there's no right or wrong in terms of what kind of personality or different characteristics or quirks or skills or strengths, the weaknesses that you can bring to the team. The important piece is educating ourselves on what those differences are, and then how do we make them all work well together. So yeah, to answer your question, as far as the onboarding and the intake process of trying to bring on a new team member, I always suggest and really encourage my clients when I've moved past the keynoting and workshop phase to consulting with the company, I always encourage them to administer some sort of personality test before they formally bring a new person onto the team.
Okay, and it doesn't matter which one, right? Because there's dozens out there.
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's so many, and I love each one for different reasons. So it's usually just an idea of what the hiring manager wants, and then I will offer my thoughts, and then we kind of decide together.
There you go. So it's not the tools, it's how to use them.
Yeah.
So then once you do that, you've developed them, you pluck them in the team, and they're working in a team dynamic. Have you worked with companies where teams they might be on paper a great team, but they're just not doing so hot? Either something's going on in the market or something's going on with client results, and they're not as happy, or team morale is low. Have you addressed that issue?
Yeah, so actually recently I did a webinar for a Fortune 100 company for an internal team within that company. And they had about 40 team members literally across the world. So let's go back to the idea of remote office space versus just one singular office space, brick and mortar. and they really, really wanted to focus and dive in deep about personality differences and also the translation of those personality differences via technology. So if you think about the idea that it's, we're communicating in so many different ways in 2019. So you've got email, you've got text messaging, you've got emojis, you've got bitmojis, you've got social media, you've got LinkedIn. And so we have all these different channels of communication. And that's not even including like internal channels outside of email. And so if you're really thinking about how do 40 people from across the world who all work remote, and you're talking about geographical differences, cultural differences, personality differences, time zone differences, which, again, the same geographical, you've got all these different dynamics being played out at the same time. And there's these misunderstandings and maybe someone thinking, okay, well, this sentence meant one thing to one person based on the tone or the readability of it versus that same sentence meant something different to someone else just based solely on the tone and the readability of it based on our personalities and how we perceive things.
Oh, it's so difficult too, especially when you're just basing your decisions off of text, like a notification or an email or whatever. But do you suggest for remote teams to meet daily or more consistently? Because of that, there could be a gap in communication.
Yeah, so I think if we go back to the personality ideals and really like educating ourselves, first and foremost, I always want teams to understand what personality types they are working with day in and day out, because then that can help us, again, educate us in understanding like how someone may approach a project versus someone else. And then once we have kind of that formal education up front, then we can start to say, okay, do we need to do a deep dive bi-weekly? Do we need to do a deep dive weekly? Do we need to do a deep dive monthly to really make sure that we're all on the same page? And then if there's kind of flare-ups that happen, do we address those one by one? Do we address them as a group? Every hiring manager or someone that is managing a team really needs to be evaluating each of those kinds of dynamics and say, okay, what works for company A may not work for this company. So they constantly need to be reevaluating.
And also it sounds like there needs to be training for the individual team member to know how to work with my team and how to work most effectively with my team.
Yeah. So if we go back to kind of building out a company manual and saying, okay, here are our ideals. Here's what we stand for. Here's what our culture is. This is what we want to adhere to, day in and day out. And then here's what our expectations are of each and every single team member. And we want you to fit into this and we want you to be successful. And let's give you all the tools that we possibly can to help you individually be successful and then collectively as a team be successful.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really smart doing it from the beginning. I want to dive a little bit into now the connectiveness between teams. And this is something that you talked about in your TEDx talk about being connected, not only self-awareness, but also the awareness of the team member, but also sparking maybe innovations or new ideas from that connectiveness. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So my TEDx was focused on the idea of being connected versus actually really connecting with each other as human beings. And so I find that it's really fundamentally important for humans to have some sort of a kind of a connection with other humans. We need that touch. We need that sense of identity that we fit in and we belong somewhere. And we need to have that understanding of how we meet eye to eye with other people professionally and personally. And so, when I experienced the things that I experienced that led me to go on to do that TEDx talk about being connected versus actually connecting with each other, it really all kind of came full circle for me that there's so much research and information around this area of technology isn't a bad thing. Like technology is a great thing for us professionally and personally, but how do we use it effectively to still be able to have that feeling of connectedness to other humans?
That's so true, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once you got shelter and food and stability going, and it's the connectedness, which is that's why when you mentioned that, it sparked that that idea for, well, more connectiveness, more people are happy, more innovation can happen. That's where my mind jumped to.
Yeah.
Once they get to that connectedness, which I think is so critical, then they can, focus on the next hierarchy of needs, which is, self-fulfillment and self-actualization, where they can reach their max potential. And if a company can foster that through connection, I think that's, have you seen any examples with the clients that you work with where they can spark connections with the team, not just to do work, but just, team actually collaborating cohesively inside and outside the office?
Sure. So some of what you had just mentioned, some of that comes back to having self-awareness and just being able to understand like how I see myself versus how other people see me. And the more that those two things are in line, the more that those two things are congruent, the more that people are firing on all cylinders to be able to give their absolute best in any situation. And so as an example, I was doing a 1.5-day long, I guess kind of company leadership workshop for the top leaders across every division for the company. And about 2/3 of the way through day one, as we were going through personality differences and we were taking a look at how each personality difference or how each personality type sees themselves, but then how other people see them, it's not always lining up congruently. And so as an example, the HR director, she saw herself for this particular company, the HR director saw herself as very the right way of doing things, that this is how like I am, this is like I'm doing my job, I'm making sure that everybody's staying on task, I'm sending out the emails, the notifications, the phone calls to make sure that our company is working from an HR perspective. And other folks in the company saw her as being kind of a little bit of like a tyrant and maybe being a little bit too egotistical and maybe not coming across as friendly in nature. And so there was maybe a little bit of like a disconnect there, that she thought she was doing all of the right things, but people were asking and wanting her to be just a little bit softer in her approach. And she had no idea that there was this kind of disconnect there. She thought she was doing the right, doing the right way and doing the right things. And then all the rest of the team members were just saying, hey, if you can just tweak it just a little bit, it's coming across in this manner.
That's so important.
It was a really fantastic aha moment for her and for the rest of the team, that there was just kind of that like slight misunderstanding that, nobody was angry, nobody was frustrated, nobody was like, well, I'm not really going to come to work today because, XYZ person is behaving like this. But once we were able to all get in the same room and educate ourselves about that, then we were able to create more of an awareness, both self-awareness and a perceived, how others are seeing you. And then I think that she was able to start maybe kind of working better with others, if that makes sense.
No, that's so key. Like that's a huge takeaway for anyone listening to this, is that those feedback loops, like those are hidden right now in your company. If you don't actively go out to find where the communication is being mismanaged, or where one person in the team might feel differently and the other person in the team might think they're doing a correct job, those are hidden until you go out and create a feedback loop and meet with the team. And I think I don't know how you can measure when a team needs that feedback loop, but I would encourage doing that. Do you, monthly, maybe biannually? Or?
I think it just depends on the organization. If you have, I think it depends on the organization. I think it depends on history. I think it depends on management styles. So the frequency of that sort of thing can change.
As long as you do it, it's what's important.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit into leadership. And I want to dive into how you ended up in the Florida Everglades, living on a canoe. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I am so grateful and thankful for the leadership program that I was able to graduate from within my college. So William Jewell College in Kansas City, Missouri. As part of the collegiate experience there, you had the opportunity to be nominated and then to apply and then to formally be accepted into this leadership program called the Prior Leadership Program. And as part of the Prior Leadership Program, it was a 3-year intense study on 4 areas of leadership: self-leadership, shared leadership, servant leadership, and situational leadership. So when we got to the situational leadership portion of the class, our instructors said to us, hey, look, we can't really teach you situational leadership in the comfort of your home or the classroom. We have to get you out of your element and into the elements to really see how well you can lead. And as, maybe entitled millennial, college students that we were, we were like, oh yeah, like we can do anything that you throw at us. And the objective was to live on a canoe for 2 weeks in the Florida Everglades. And as part of the objective, you really had one thing to do. You had to get from point A to point B 110 miles over the course of those 2 weeks. And that was it.
Wow.
We were divided up into small teams of about 10 to 14 of us. Each team was given a guide to make sure that, we were safe and we were okay. I mean, nobody cared if we were, sunburnt or paddled the wrong direction for a couple of hours, or if we came upon crocodiles or snakes or whatever. And so it was just, they were there to make sure that, we didn't get ourselves into any like imminent danger, but the rest of it was up to us. And so again, like literally 10 to 14 of us just trying to get 110 miles over the course of those 2 weeks studying situational leadership.
Wow. So that's insane. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Granted, there's crocodiles here and there. You took photos of them too, right?
Yeah. It's probably about time that I repost everything again because it's been a few years. So I actually took the trip twice. So I went as an undergrad, as part of the leadership program. And then I elected to go back about 4 years ago as a chaperone. And it was a really fascinating experience both times that, watching the process of human beings go through, seemingly, we're used to being the top of the class. We're used to being leaders. We're used to being able to find out the answer and figure it out and be a great team player. But when you literally get humans out of their comfort zone and you put them into a situation that they are 100% uncomfortable with, something that they, have never experienced in their lives, adrenaline might get you through 24 hours or, maybe you're just saying like you're doing a company event and it's a 3-hour, company event, maybe adrenaline will get people through like, small increments of time like that. But when you literally put people in a situation for 2 weeks, you're going to have a mental, emotional, physical breakdown at some point, and then you start to understand and realize how to build yourself back up, and then you start to learn the tools of what it'll take you to be a great, strong leader, no matter what the situation is that you're being thrown into.
Yeah, that's something that, like you mentioned, you can't teach it verbatim. You have to actually go and do it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times I think that we think that we're great leaders and that we can, easily start adding things to our resume and, try to start being in front of a team of people and try to lead them. But if you're thrown into situations and you start to become emotional and you start to become a little bit off kilter and you're not sure how to handle things, that's where we get a little bit dicey in management.
That's where you find who you are, right?
I guess so.
So translating that back to, like, say, for most companies can't throw their employees with crocodiles. I don't know if they would want to, but if they couldn't. But how, it's a two-pronged question. The first is, how would you suggest companies set up an environment to nurture leaders in order for leaders to actually self-select themselves? And what are some of the characteristics from a management view to identify those leaders where you can say, this is someone who I want to take my place sometime in the future?
So the first question is how do we develop our leaders? And the second question is how do we identify the right people to be able to move them into leadership roles? So the first question I would answer with the idea that you constantly have to be doing professional development, and whatever that professional development means to you, hiring keynote speakers, hiring leadership experts, hiring management consultants, reading books, reading research, reading studies, constantly trying to understand yourself, understand your leadership and management styles, and then how does that ultimately play back to the company goals, and how can those two things work together to create the most productive employees possible? So there's so much research and opportunity for people to grow their skills and to be great leaders and managers. How do you identify great leaders and managers? Oh man, I mean, we could talk about that, I think, all day long, but I think that there's a level of influence. I think there's a level of impact that we're looking for. I think there's a level of emotional maturity. I think that there's a level of experience. There's several books that kind of talk about the idea of do you promote someone based on skill, expertise, and history, like how much time have they actually worked in that particular field, versus where is the line that you promote someone that has an incredible level of influence and being able to influence employees and other team members to be able to do their best, to live their best, to give their best, to contribute their best, like where's that line, and how are employees going to respect that, and I'm trying to think of like my favorite book on that topic off the top of my head, and it's not ringing, it's like on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember it, but there really is kind of that line of like, how do you identify that right person? And I think it's a different answer for every company. Maybe perhaps some companies are much more technical in the type of work that they do, and they really do need to find that right person who has that great level of influence, but also has that great technical capability and understanding how the products work, versus maybe there's a company that's not as technical minded, and it really is more about motivation, inspiration, influence, and impact. And maybe you have a little bit more leeway with, what kind of resume or person that you're looking for that. So
that's really true. Thank you for encompassing such a broad answer and a great question and a great answer. So for a final question, for closing thoughts, I want to pick your brain and just really know, which leader, doesn't have to be a company, it can be in any field, but which leader, alive or past, do you admire, and why do you admire them and their leadership style?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much. Thank you so much for asking me this. So somebody that I absolutely adore, she inspires the heck out of me, and I think she is just such an incredible leader in modern today corporate America, is a woman by the name of Kat Cole. She and I are basically the same age, but she has accomplished so much in her career. She's the current COO of Focus Brands. She's the former president over all of Cinnabon, and then she was promoted within Focus Brands to COO over Cinnabon, Jamba Juice, McAllister's Deli, Auntie Anne's, Schlotsky's Deli, and then a few other brands. And I mean, this woman is so incredible, and to know her career and how she started out being born to a single mother, and working her way up in her first job to kind of being like an hourly employee to getting into management with that corporation, and then moving on to Cinnabon, and now moving on to overall Focus Brands. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like she is such an incredible example of leadership in today's corporate America, and how much she not only works hard but also inspires people. And so yeah, she's an amazing leader that I look up to.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Shannon, well, thank you for being on the show. We'll have Shannon's information on the footnotes of this show. You can reach out to Shannon, check out her website, and learn more about her. Shannon, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much.